They came without warning, not in the skies with fire and fury, but quietly, like a whisper behind your ear that makes your blood run cold. By the time anyone on Earth realized what was happening, the damage was already done. The signals were too perfect, the technology too clean. No flashy invasions, no massive ships blotting out the sun, just lights in the night, satellites glitching, systems collapsing one by one. At first, we thought it was just another solar storm, some random cosmic interference. But it wasn't random. It was planned. And we were never supposed to notice. That's the part that stings the most. The idea that they didn't even think we were worth a fight. We weren't a threat. We were a resource. Maybe even a curiosity. Livestock if you want to get poetic about it. But not once did they see us as equals. Not once. It was almost funny in a bitter kind of way. All those decades we spent looking to the stars, wondering if we were alone, hoping for someone to talk to, someone to guide us or teach us or just say, "Hey, you're not the only ones out here." And when the silence finally broke, it wasn't a message, it was a hand around our throat. A hand we couldn't see. For a long time people just disappeared. That's how it started. First, the ones no one would miss, off-grid types, people living alone in forgotten towns, the homeless, the wanderers. Then it got bolder. Pilots, scientists, soldiers. Anyone who got too close to certain places or asked the wrong questions. Then came the dreams. At least that's what most called them. But they weren't dreams. People woke up screaming in languages they didn't know, drawing symbols they'd never seen before, talking about rooms made of glass and metal that hummed like a heartbeat. Some said they felt peace in those dreams, like they'd finally found something they were missing their whole lives. Others felt cold, like a part of them had been carved out while they slept. Nobody could explain it, and the ones who tried to understand, doctors, neurologists, even the military, either vanished or came back different. Quieter. Distant. Like something had hollowed them out from the inside. The government said nothing, of course. Just static responses and sudden blackouts during press briefings. Then the cities began to change. Not overnight, but slowly. Streetlights blinked in strange patterns. Entire blocks would lose power at exactly the same moment across the country. Drones flew overhead, but they weren't ours. Too smooth, too fast, too quiet. And always watching. That was the worst part, you could feel it, that gaze. Like the air itself was pressing in on you, testing you, waiting for something. We didn't even know what. And then someone fought back. Just one man or maybe a woman, nobody ever got a clear answer. They hit a comms relay near Anchorage, something buried so deep underground most people thought it was just an old missile silo. But whatever it was, it mattered. Because after that, everything changed. The sky cracked open one night just for a second. Like the stars blinked and something was behind them. That's when we knew for sure. They were here. Not watching from afar. Here. Living beneath us, above us, among us. And maybe even inside us. That was when people started to panic. Not the kind of panic you see in movies with looting and chaos and fires in the street. No, this was colder. It was silent stores, empty highways, whole towns that just stopped. Parents keeping their kids home from school. Friends going off-grid. Radios playing the same song for hours until someone smashed the speaker. Quiet, careful fear. The kind that grows roots in your chest. The kind that doesn't scream, it whispers. You'd think humanity would crumble. That we'd give up. Some did. But not all. And that's where the story really begins. Not with the invasion. Not with the dreams or the disappearances. But with the people who decided not to bow. They weren't soldiers or scientists or politicians. They were the forgotten ones. The ones who had nothing left to lose. A freight yard worker who'd seen too much. A nurse with strange scars on her arms and no memory of how she got them. A kid who kept drawing the same thing over and over again in the dirt. A shape no one could recognize but that made grown men shake when they looked at it. They didn't know each other. They didn't even know what they were doing at first. But something pulled them together like threads winding into a rope. Not fate. Not destiny. Just desperation. And maybe something deeper. Something buried in the human spirit that refuses to be caged. They started finding others. People who'd seen the shadows move when they shouldn't. People who felt the static in their bones. Survivors of dreams who still heard whispers when the wind blew through broken windows. And slowly a picture started to form. The enemy wasn't a race. It wasn't an army. It was worse. It was an idea. A concept made real by something so far beyond us we didn't even have words for it. It moved through minds, not machines. It wore no face but left fingerprints in every corner of the world. And it hated us, not for what we were but for what we might become. That's the part that broke them. The part that made them lash out. Because they saw what we didn't. They saw what we could be if we stopped tearing ourselves apart. If we stopped waiting to be saved. We were dangerous. Not because of our weapons or our numbers, but because we still had something they'd lost. Something ancient. Something stupid and fragile and loud. Hope. And hope is contagious. It spreads. It infects. Even across galaxies. Even through time. They thought they could crush it before it bloomed. But they forgot what hope becomes when it has nothing left to hold on to. It becomes rage. The quiet kind. The kind that burns slow and steady and doesn't stop until it finds justice. Or revenge. And that's when the fight began. Not for Earth. Not even for survival. But for the right to be feared. The right to be known. The right to say, we are here. And we are not yours. The first battle wasn't in space. It wasn't even on land. It was inside the mind of a man standing on a rooftop, holding a broken radio and a half-drunk bottle of water, screaming into the night, daring the stars to answer. And something did. Something vast and cold and cruel. But it didn't come alone. Because that man wasn't alone. And neither are you. This story isn't about aliens or war. It's about what happens when the universe finally notices us. And what we become when we realize it has. So if you're hearing this, if you're watching, remember this isn't a warning. It's a beginning. One they didn't want us to have. One we weren't supposed to survive long enough to tell. But we did. And now they know. Humanity doesn't beg. We don't kneel. We fight. Even when the odds are dust and the sky is bleeding. Especially then. Because that's what scares them most. Not our strength. Not our anger. But our refusal to break. They came for a quiet planet. They found the galaxy's worst kind. The first time Kay heard the signal, she thought it was just interference. Static on the old ham radio she kept in her garage, a relic from her late father that she never quite got rid of. It was the kind of thing you forget about until one night it starts talking. Not words, not really. Just patterns. Bursts. Rhythms that felt wrong in the pit of her stomach. Like hearing a heartbeat that didn't belong to anything alive. She tried to ignore it at first, turning the knobs, adjusting the antenna. Blaming nearby power lines or a passing truck. But it didn't stop. If anything, it got clearer. Like it was learning. Tuning itself to her. Then it started showing up in other places. Her phone would glitch at exactly 3:17 a.m. every night. Her TV would flicker, even when it was unplugged. Once, she woke up to find the radio on, volume low, humming that same strange cadence. The dog refused to enter the garage after that. Just stood at the threshold, growling at the dark like something was waiting inside. That's when she stopped sleeping. Whatever it wasn't trying to stay hidden anymore. It was watching her. Studying her. And she wasn't the only one. 3 states away, a kid named Leo was building towers. Not with blocks or bricks, but with scrap. Pieces of metal, rusted bolts, wires stripped from broken appliances. He stacked them in perfect shapes. Always 13 pieces, always in silence, always facing west. His parents thought it was just a phase, maybe the start of some strange obsession. But Leo wasn't obsessed. He was listening. When asked why he did it, he'd say the towers helped him sleep. That the voices were quieter when he finished one. Nobody knew what that meant until the power grid in their town went down for exactly 13 minutes one night. No storms. No warning. Just darkness. And then a soft sound, like whispering but from far away behind concrete and earth. After that night, the towers weren't found in Leo's room anymore. They started appearing in the woods behind the house, in neighbors' yards and empty lots. Like he was being told where to build next. Kay found his picture online by accident. Someone had uploaded a blurry video of the kid placing a piece of twisted copper on top of a pile of junk, and the signal, the one from her radio, was playing in the background. She watched that clip 30 times before she realized she was crying. Not from fear. From recognition. Whatever was happening to that kid, it was the same thing happening to her. She started digging after that. Quietly. Carefully. Using burner phones and old laptops she knew couldn't be traced. Everything led to dead ends. Websites vanished overnight. Forums where people talked about the signal would suddenly lock down, accounts wiped clean. Even screenshots she saved disappeared from her drives like they'd never existed. But the people, she remembered them. The stories. Dreams of metal corridors and cold lights. Memories of places they'd never been, languages they never learned. And always the feeling of being watched. She wasn't alone. There were others. Some still looking for answers. Some already gone. One name kept coming up in the stories. Not a real name, just a word. Hollow Reach. At first she thought it was a place. Maybe a facility, a town, a project buried deep in classified files. But it didn't show up on any maps, any documents. Not even rumors. Until she traced an old shipping manifest from a decommissioned satellite relay, years out of date. One of the destinations had been redacted. But someone forgot to strip the coordinates. And when she plugged them in, it pointed to nothing. Not a city. Not a base. Just empty land in the Utah desert. Or at least that's what it looked like. She didn't pack much. A duffel bag. Water. The radio. And a note left behind for her sister that just said, "If I don't come back, it found me." She didn't know what she expected when she got there. Maybe ruins. Maybe silence. What she found was wind, dust, and a fence that didn't belong. Too new. Too clean. The kind that hums when you get too close. She didn't cross it. She didn't need to. The radio turned on by itself and the signal changed. It wasn't static anymore. It was a voice. Her voice. Saying something she didn't remember ever saying. "It knows what you fear." Then it cut off. And the fence? It opened. Inside she found nothing at first. Just rocks, sand, the usual desert stretch that goes on forever. But about a mile in, the sky felt thinner. Like the air was holding its breath. Her steps sounded too loud. Her shadow bent at the wrong angle. And then she saw it. A circle of metal, buried mostly underground, its edge just visible if you knew where to look. Older than anything she'd seen before. But no rust. No wear. Just pulsing light beneath the surface like it was breathing. That's when she passed out. They said it was 3 days before she woke up, miles away from the circle, lying in the backseat of her car with no memory of how she got there. The engine was running. The radio was off. But her arm had new marks, lines etched just under the skin, too perfect to be natural. She didn't go home after that. Couldn't. She knew someone was waiting. Watching. Instead, she went looking for the others. And one by one they found her. People like Leo. People who'd seen the shapes. Heard the voices. Felt the sky shift above them like a curtain waiting to drop. They didn't call themselves anything. They didn't form a group. That felt too neat, too official. What they were couldn't be labeled. Just people with the same ache. The same sense that the world had already changed and no one else could see it. Some called it the shimmer. Others called it the fold. A few said it was the second silence, whatever that meant. But the message was always the same: they were coming. Or maybe they were already here. And we just hadn't noticed. Then came the night the stars blinked again. Not everywhere. Just in a narrow path across the earth, as if something massive had moved between us and space but left no shadow. Radio shorted out. Planes grounded. People dreamed in unison. Hundreds of thousands, all describing the same place. A hallway that went on forever, made of black stone and soft light, with doors that whispered as you passed them. And at the end a window. Looking out into a sky that wasn't ours. With a moon that blinked. Governments scrambled. Publicly they denied everything. Called it a mass delusion. Privately they went into lockdown. Entire sectors of research vanished behind classified walls. People disappeared again. Scientists. Engineers. Even a linguist who had been studying ancient symbols on the floor of a cave in Turkey. Ones that looked exactly like the marks on Kay's arm. They all went dark. Kay kept moving. City to city. Listening for the signal. Watching for signs. And slowly the pattern emerged. Whatever was coming, it wasn't random. It was targeting something specific. Not bloodlines. Not professions. Not geography. Something else. Something buried deep in the human condition. Curiosity? Defiance? Oh, she didn't know. But whatever it was, it scared them. And that made her hold on to it tighter. She met others. A man who remembered being in 2 places at once. A girl who painted stars that didn't exist in any known galaxy, until a telescope caught one of them flaring to life months later. A blind woman who spoke fluently in a language no AI could translate. And each of them had that same look in their eyes. That mix of fear and fire. That quiet knowledge that they were now part of something much bigger than themselves. Something vast. And hungry. The signal changed again. No longer just noise or voices. Now it carried images. Memories. Glimpses of something trying to understand us or maybe mimic us. But it was wrong. The emotions were too sharp, the colors too clean, the feelings layered in ways that didn't match how humans think. It was like watching a dream being recreated by someone who'd never had one. And the message became clear, not through words but through sensation. You are the breach. Kay didn't know what that meant. Not yet. But she knew it mattered. And somewhere, something was coming closer. She felt it in her bones. In the way shadows stretched a little longer than they should. In the way silence felt heavier, like it was listening back. The world hadn't ended. Not yet. But it had already changed. And the worst part? Most people still didn't see it. But some did. And they weren't hiding anymore. They started calling themselves ghosts. Not because they were dead or invisible, but because they no longer belonged anywhere. They couldn't go back to their old lives. Jobs, families, routines, it all felt fake now, like trying to play a role in a movie that had ended years ago. Once you felt it, once you knew something was watching, reaching, learning from you, you couldn't pretend anymore. Kay understood that better than anyone. She barely remembered the taste of coffee or what it felt like to laugh without checking the sky afterward. There was no going back. She found the others one by one. Some were already on the run. Some didn't even realize they were being followed until she showed them the proof. Like Jules, the air traffic controller who blacked out for 22 minutes during a calm night shift and came to with blood on his collar and flight pads scratched into the skin of his forearm. He didn't tell anyone. He just quit and vanished. Kay tracked him down in a hostel in New Mexico, talking to the stars like they owed him something. When she showed him the symbols on her arm, he cried without a sound. Like someone had finally said the thing he'd been trying to scream for weeks. Then there was Noor, who used to work on weather satellites until she started seeing patterns that didn't make sense. Wind currents forming in perfect spirals, always in the same locations, always above abandoned towns. The same towns that later showed spikes in electromagnetic fields, static distortions, and reports of missing time. When she brought it to her supervisor, he told her to forget it. Then he stopped showing up to work. His house was emptied overnight. No trace. She took that as her answer. Burned her IDs. Changed her name. Never stopped looking. When Kay found her, Noor had already mapped dozens of these spiral zones, as she called them. All of them pulsing with the same frequency Kay's radio had picked up months ago. They weren't alone. There were more. A woman who could hear the hum of machines even when they were off. A man who claimed the stars rearranged themselves when he stared too long. A set of twins who spoke in perfect unison while asleep, muttering words that didn't exist in any language database. Patterns emerged. Not just strange experiences, but connections between people, places, and feelings that couldn't be explained by coincidence. And always the Watchers. They didn't move like people. No footsteps. No breathing. Just presence. Felt in mirrors, in the backs of throats, in the static behind phone calls that never made it through. Some said they looked human. Some said they were shadows that moved even when there was no light. But all agreed on one thing. They only showed up when you got too close to the truth. They didn't kill. Not always. But they made you disappear. Not just from the world, but from memory. Like you'd never existed at all. That was the real terror. Kay remembered someone named Jace. She was sure of it. A name in her notebook. A photo with his arm around her shoulder, half a laugh frozen on his face. But she couldn't remember his voice. Couldn't remember how they met. And when she showed the photo to the others, no one recognized him. Not even Noor, who had written Jace's name in a list of survivors only a week before. His name was there, scratched out. But Noor swore she hadn't done it. Something was unraveling. Not just reality, but memory, identity, time itself. The ghosts weren't just running from the Watchers. They were fighting to hold on to who they were. And then the dreams changed again. This time they weren't corridors or stars or strange shapes. They were memories, but not your own. You'd see a man wake up on a mining colony beneath the ice of some moon and know what he had for breakfast. You'd feel a child's hand touch a glowing wall and know she wasn't on Earth. People you'd never met. Worlds you'd never visited. But it felt real. Too real. As if something was trying to show you something. Not images. Not warnings. Feelings. Lessons. Loss. Kay dreamed of a man who died screaming as his ship broke apart above a gas giant with no name. She woke up gasping, hands shaking, skin freezing even though her room was warm. The name Verex echoed in her mind, but it meant nothing. At least, not until Noor found a reference to it in a scan of ancient Sumerian tablets. Symbols almost identical to the ones on Kay's arm. Translated loosely, it meant, the uninvited sky. They were here before. That much was clear now. Maybe not physically. But they had touched this world. Left marks. Names in the dust. Warnings in the bloodlines. Maybe we were never alone. Maybe we were just the next attempt. The next experiment. The next threat. That's what made it all make sense. The fear. The silence. The Watchers. We weren't supposed to wake up. But something had gone wrong in their plan. Something had let the signal slip through. Maybe a crack in their system. Maybe someone on the inside who saw what they were doing and couldn't stand it anymore. A defector. a traitor, or maybe even a survivor. One of us. The ghosts didn't know. But they believed it. Because the more they shared their stories, the more the patterns solidified. They were being tested. Prodded. Not for destruction, but for limits. For potential. To see how far a human mind could stretch before it broke. How far a soul could bend before it turned into something else. Some passed the test. Most didn't. Those who did, they changed. Became different. Not stronger. Not better. Just tuned. Kay saw it in Jules. The way his eyes never blinked when he stared at the sky. The way he answered questions before they were asked. The way animals avoided him. Nor noticed it in Kay too. The marks on her arm glowing faintly at night. The radio whispering without being turned on. The way her dreams bled into waking hours, as if the veil between sleep and reality was wearing thin. And through it all, the watchers grew more restless. Their shadows closer. Their movements more aggressive. They didn't like the change. Didn't like the breach. Whatever they were protecting, it was weakening. And the ghosts were getting too close. That's when the child appeared. No name. No history. Found walking alone on a frozen highway in Canada, barefoot, eyes glowing with faint silver light that flickered like candle flames. No injuries. No speech. Just a note clenched in her hand that read, "She knows." They took her in. She never said a word. Just sat and stared at the stars through a cracked motel window. But strange things happened when she was near. The signal grew louder. Radios picked up whispers in languages no one could translate. Birds stopped flying overhead. And when the watchers came too close one night, she simply looked at them, and they vanished. That changed everything. They weren't invincible. They could be repelled. Not by weapons. Not by force. But by something else. Something within us. Maybe purity. Maybe pain. Maybe something older. Whatever it was, the child had it. And now they had to protect her. Because if she was what they thought, she might be the key. Not to stopping them. But to surviving what came next. Because this wasn't an invasion. This was the prelude. It started with the sky again. Not blinking this time, not disappearing. Just wrong. The color was off. Not by much, just enough that you had to stop and stare for a second, trying to remember what blue was supposed to feel like. Air tasted metallic. Static clung to skin. People started reporting strange dreams again, but now they weren't just stories shared in hushed voices. They were bleeding into the news. Sleepwalking incidents. Mass fainting spells. Scientists claiming temporal distortion readings they couldn't explain. Kay watched it all unfold from a motel in Nevada, the child asleep on the bed beside her, breathing slow and silent like the desert outside. Nor had gone missing 3 days earlier. One moment she was at the edge of a spiral zone they'd been tracking, and the next the drone feed went black. No trace. No signal. Kay kept calling her phone even though she knew it wouldn't ring. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just sat in the dark for a long time, staring at the blinking cursor on her laptop where Noor's last coordinates were still frozen. Everyone who got too close disappeared. Everyone but her. Jules said it meant something. That maybe she wasn't immune, but chosen. Kay didn't believe in fate. She believed in science. In survival. In the fear you feel right before something terrible happens, when your gut tells you to run and your legs don't move. But she couldn't deny it anymore. The child had chosen her. The signal kept changing when she was nearby. And the watchers, they didn't come as close anymore. Not since the night Kay had looked back at one. It had stood at the edge of the parking lot, a shimmer in the air shaped like a man, but just off enough to feel sick to look at. It had watched her. Silent. Still. Waiting. Kay stared right at it and whispered, "I know you." She didn't know why she said it. The words just came. And the thing flinched. Like it recognized her too. Then it was gone. And she'd been shaking ever since. They needed answers. Real ones. Not symbols. Not dreams. Not guesses. So Jules made the call. He had an old contact. A physicist who used to work on top-secret defense projects before vanishing into the private sector. They found him living off-grid in a cabin near the Rockies, half-mad, talking to machines he'd built out of old satellite parts and spare TV guts. He didn't ask who they were. Just looked at Kay and said, "It's already begun, hasn't it?" He called it the convergence. Said it wasn't just about Earth. That every intelligent species went through it eventually, the moment their world stopped being theirs. Some fought it. Most didn't even see it coming. But humans, we were different. We pushed back. Even without knowing why. That's what made us dangerous. That's what made us a threat. Not because we were strong. But because we were unpredictable. He'd seen the signs in old data, transmissions buried under layers of space noise, patterns and solar flares that weren't natural. He'd written it all down once, published a paper. No one took it seriously. Then he disappeared. He showed them the original signal, K's signal, pulled from a satellite glitch over the Arctic Circle 10 years ago. The same cadence. The same pulse. But back then it was fainter. Like it hadn't found its way in yet. But now it was everywhere. The physicist said there was a threshold. A point of no return. And we were right on the edge. When the frequencies hit a certain range, when the watchers moved in fully, there'd be no hiding, no fighting, no forgetting. Just assimilation. Or erasure. The child, he said, was the anomaly. A genetic echo. A crosspoint between what we were and what they feared we could become. A final variable in an equation older than memory. If they got to her first, it was over. If she survived long enough, something else might happen. Something even he didn't understand. They left the next morning with no plan. Just a direction, north. The child had whispered it during the night, just one word, sanctum. Kay didn't know what it meant. Neither did Jules. But they followed it anyway. The signal was loudest when they drove toward the mountains. Electronics failed every few hours. GPS spun in circles. Time skipped. Once, Kay looked down at the clock on the dashboard and realized 20 minutes had vanished. They hadn't stopped. The road hadn't changed. But something had moved around them. Or through them. They found the sanctum by accident. A fissure in the mountains, half covered by snow and shadow, invisible unless you were looking at it through the lens of an old thermal camera. It wasn't a structure. It was a space. Hollow. Warm. Breathing. The air felt too still inside. Like stepping into the chest of something waiting to exhale. The walls weren't made of rock or metal, but something in between. Smooth, black, soft to the touch but impossible to scratch. Lights pulsed underfoot with every step, as if the place recognized their presence. Jules stayed near the entrance, watching for movement. Kay carried the child deeper into the darkness, guided by the pulse in her arm and the rising hum in her bones. The deeper they went, the more human the place felt. Not in design but in pain. She saw shapes on the walls that twisted when she tried to focus. Images that changed when she blinked. Memories that weren't hers. People crying, screaming, laughing, fading. Like the sanctum had absorbed pieces of them all and now played them back like a broken projector. At the center they found a chamber. A sphere floating inches above the ground, spinning slowly, humming with energy Kay couldn't name. The child stepped forward, touched it, and everything went still. No sound. No air. Just silence so deep it pressed against the skull. Then light. Blinding, white-hot light that poured out of the sphere in tendrils, wrapping around the girl, pulling her upward until her feet left the ground. Kay screamed. Reached for her. But something held her back. Not force. Not fear. Just understanding. The sphere was showing her something. And Kay could feel it too. Not with eyes. Not with ears. But through the echo in her chest. A warning. A memory. A choice. She saw Earth not as it was now but as it could become. Skies torn open. Cities hushed. Not destroyed but emptied. As if the people had been rewritten. Blank faces. Hollow eyes. Walking routines they didn't remember choosing. She saw Kay standing among them, screaming, but no one could hear. Because she hadn't made the choice when she had the chance. Because she hadn't listened. Then it faded. The child fell. Kay caught her before she hit the floor. She was breathing. But her eyes were different. No longer glowing, but deeper. Older. Like something had awakened in her. Or passed through. Jules called out from the entrance. Something was coming. Not one. Dozens. Maybe more. The watchers. The shadows. The ones who moved without footsteps. They weren't hiding anymore. Kay felt it before she saw them. The pressure. Like a storm rolling through bone. The sphere behind her cracked, its surface flickering, destabilizing. It had given what it could. Whatever power it held, it was gone now. Passed on. Transferred. The child stood. She didn't speak. She didn't run. She simply raised one hand, and the chamber lit up with threads of light that danced around her like veins drawn in fire. The watchers stopped at the threshold. The air vibrated. Something ancient stirred in the space between them. And then the child whispered one word, soft, quiet, filled with everything Kay didn't understand but somehow knew was right. No. The watchers didn't advance. But they didn't retreat either. The world held its breath. Waiting. And the war that wasn't a war was about to begin. Time didn't move right anymore. Seconds stretched and snapped back like rubber bands. One breath could last a lifetime. A blink could bring the world to its knees. Kay didn't know how long she stood there, heart hammering in her chest, the glow of the sanctum wrapping the child in silent defiance, the watchers frozen in the archway like a wall of waiting death. Her mouth was dry. Her hands shook. But something inside her had changed. She wasn't just afraid anymore. She was ready. The child turned to her slowly, not with fear but with something deeper, like calm rising from the center of a storm. She reached out and took Kay's hand, and in that instant, a flood of sensations rushed through her. Not thoughts. Not images. Feelings. Lifetimes of them. Loneliness that spanned galaxies. Hunger that wasn't for food. Silence that screamed for eons. It wasn't just her. It wasn't just Earth. Other worlds had gone through this. Other people. And most of them had been lost. Because they hadn't chosen. They hadn't known how. The watchers moved again. Not all at once. Just one. A ripple in the void, slow and deliberate, stepping into the light like it had no reason to fear anything anymore. Its form was still unclear, like it didn't want to be understood. A smear of shape and shadow. But Kay could feel its intent. It didn't want to kill the child. Not yet. It wanted to bring her back. Like a tool. Like a missing piece. Kay stepped between them. She didn't have a weapon. Just a look in her eyes that said, "Not this time." The watcher paused. Then tilted its head. A flicker of curiosity. Or amusement. Then it raised its hand. Reality buckled. The walls around them trembled as if the entire sanctum recognized what was coming and didn't like it. Kay's skin felt like it was peeling backward. Her heartbeat skipped, then multiplied. But before she could collapse, the child stepped forward again, her small hand rising like she'd done before, but this time the light wasn't soft. It was blinding. Furious. Alive. The watcher recoiled. Not in pain but in resistance. Like it couldn't believe what it was seeing. What it was feeling. Then the others moved. All of them. In perfect unison. Stepping forward. Closing in. Jules shouted from the back, his voice barely cutting through the roar of the rising hum that filled the air. "Kay, we need to go." But Kay couldn't move. Neither could the child. This was it. They'd come not just for her, but for the decision. One last test. One final push to break the chain before it set. Kay finally understood what the physicist had meant. It wasn't about destroying the watchers. You couldn't destroy what you couldn't define. It was about choosing who we were. What we would become. Whether we'd surrender to the silence or scream into it. And the child was the scream. But she couldn't do it alone. Kay knelt beside her and whispered, "It's okay. I'm here. I'm not letting them take you." The child didn't speak. But her hand tightened. And then, everything cracked. Not the ground. Not the walls. But reality. The air bent. The sky outside the sanctum twisted, folding in like paper soaked in flame. And then the watchers started to change. Their forms pulsed, shaking as if something deep inside them had been disrupted. They weren't invincible. They were incomplete. Just projections of something that no longer understood how to control us. They had waited too long. And now, they weren't facing silence anymore. They were facing noise. Oh, fire. Jules ran forward, grabbing Kay's arm, dragging her and the child away from the center as the light expanded outward like a heartbeat made of stars. The watchers didn't retreat. They surged. A desperate wave. One last attempt to overwrite what had begun. But the sanctum wouldn't let them. The walls flared with symbols, shifting, glowing, spinning, faster than thought. A language not meant to be spoken. Only felt. Kay turned in time to see the child lift both hands now, her eyes wide with blinding light, her face wet with silent tears, and her voice finally breaking the silence. "Remember us." It wasn't loud. It was everywhere. The watcher screamed. Not out loud, but across the air, across thought, across the invisible field that had always kept them in control. It fractured. They twisted. Shapes collapsed. Shadows pulled backward like water draining from the edge of a broken world. And the sanctum began to fall. The walls groaned. The ceiling cracked. Everything started pulling inward, collapsing on a point of light now hovering where the sphere once floated, small, dense, shaking with energy too raw to contain. Kay grabbed the child and ran. Jules led the way, shouting over the chaos, pulling open the half-hidden path they'd come through, dodging falling debris and bursts of energy that shattered stone into dust. Behind them, the watchers screamed again, this time in loss. They weren't just being repelled. They were being forgotten. Their hold was breaking. Kay didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if they'd survive it. She didn't know if Earth was already too far gone to pull back from the edge. But she knew one thing as they reached the surface and the sanctum imploded behind them in a shockwave of wind and color and silence. Something had changed. Not out there. Here. Inside. Inside the child. Inside Kay. Inside every ghost who had survived long enough to make it this far. The war wasn't over. But the ground had shifted. The rules had cracked. And now, for the first time, the Watchers didn't know what was coming next. They weren't the only ones with memory anymore. They weren't the only ones with the power to shape what came next. The stars above shimmered, not like they were blinking, but like they were watching back. The wind didn't feel right when they stepped back into the open air. It should have been clean, sharp with mountain chill, but it carried something else now, like the scent of electricity after a storm, but deeper, soaked in something ancient. Kay stood still for a second, her breath catching in her chest as the ground under her boots seemed to pulse. Not violently. Not even enough to call it a tremor. But it was there. Like the world had a heartbeat now, and she wasn't sure if it was hers anymore. The sanctum had collapsed in on itself behind them, the last of its light folding inward like stars swallowed by silence. There was nothing left. Just broken rock, dust, and echoes that didn't bounce back. Jules was pacing in short, tight circles, checking his gear, trying to send a signal that kept returning the same static pulse. The child sat on a boulder, arms wrapped around her knees, eyes blank, like the light had burned something out of her. Not gone. Just sleeping. Kay watched the sky. It was still blue. Still Earth. But not the same. There were shapes now. Barely visible unless you knew how to look. Thin outlines, bending light in ways that shouldn't be possible. Kay didn't speak. Her hands were clenched too tight, knuckles aching, jaw locked against the scream pushing up her throat. This wasn't over. She could feel it. In her bones. In the pull behind her eyes. And then Jules cursed under his breath and held up the comm device. You need to see this. The screen flickered with interference for a second before clearing, just long enough to show the footage. Not live. Not recorded. Something in between. Time slipped through it. But the image was clear, a city skyline twisted out of shape. Not destroyed. Reshaped. The buildings hadn't fallen, they'd bent. Glass flowed like water. Steel curled like vines. And walking through it all were people. Silent. Unblinking. Their shadows didn't match their bodies. This isn't just spreading, Jules said quietly. It's accelerating. Kay's stomach dropped. She looked at the child. Still silent. Still watching. But something had changed in her expression. Not fear. Not confusion. Awareness. Like she already knew this was coming. Like she'd known all along. And that's when Kay felt it. A sharp, stinging pulse in her arm, right where she'd felt the signal before. It flared once. Twice. Then settled into a rhythm. Faster than before. Urgent. Calling her somewhere. Pulling her forward. They didn't speak again until they reached the car. The drive was silent. The road twisted through pine trees and patches of snow, and the signal only grew stronger. It wasn't just in the tech anymore. It was inside her. A frequency beneath thought. She could feel the Watchers again. Not close. But not gone. Like they'd stepped back, regrouped. But then came the twist. As they passed a deserted gas station on the edge of a small town that didn't show up on any map, Kay slammed the brakes. The air changed. The signal flatlined. Her vision blurred for a second. Then sharpened. There were people. Lots of them. Not Watchers. Not corrupted. Human. A makeshift settlement had formed behind the gas station, hidden under broken signage and tarp-covered frames. Armed, organized, and alert. They didn't look surprised to see Kay and Jules step out. But what shocked her was the woman who met her at the gate. Alive. Breathing. Standing. No. She didn't look like herself. Her eyes glowed faintly under the brim of her hood. Her voice was lower. Steadier. I told you I'd find you. Kay could barely breathe. How are you? Different, Nor said. They didn't take me. They showed me. And then they let me go. Jules didn't buy it. Why? Nor smiled sadly. Because they think it's already too late. And they want us to be the ones to carry the message. Kay felt sick. What message? That the war never started. We missed it. It happened while we were watching the sky and dreaming about other galaxies. They already passed through. We're just a memory now, being rewritten one layer at a time. But Kay shook her head. No. The child, she changed something. We pushed back. The sanctum. I know, Nor said, looking past her. That's why they're scared now. Kay turned. The child was gone. She was standing alone at the edge of the settlement, staring at the tree line, where figures now gathered. Not Watchers. Not humans. Something in between. Faces familiar but not quite right. Like mirrors that didn't reflect what they were supposed to. They look like us, Jules whispered. Noor's voice dropped to a hush. That's because they are us. The second wave. Not from space. From time. Memories of a version of humanity that had fallen. Copies sent back not to attack, but to replace. Quietly. Efficiently. One life at a time. They weren't preparing for an invasion, Noor said. They were preparing for integration. The Watchers were just the beginning. Now they send the echoes. Kay staggered back. Everything inside her screamed that this couldn't be real. But it was. The child turned slowly, eyes filled with tears that didn't fall. She knew, Noor whispered. She's not just a key. She's a bridge. Between what we are, and what they tried to make us. The echoes moved closer. They didn't attack. They didn't speak. They just watched. Waiting for someone to blink first. And deep in Kay's chest, the signal flared one last time. But this time it wasn't calling her forward. It was warning her. They were already inside. The first echo stepped into the light. It looked like Kay. Not exactly, but close enough that it stopped her breath in her throat. Same height. Same walk. Same eyes, but wrong. Like they'd taken everything on the outside and hollowed out the rest. No fear. No warmth. Just stillness. And behind it, more were coming. Faces Kay had seen before, on missions, in photos, in news stories about people who'd gone missing without a trace. All of them now part of the wave, walking like shadows with memories that didn't belong to them anymore. Nor didn't flinch. Neither did Jules. But Kay saw it, the split-second hesitation, the fear buried just under the skin. This wasn't a battle they were trained for. This wasn't something they could shoot their way out of. These weren't enemies. They were warnings of what could have been, of what still might be. The child stood frozen, fingers twitching at her sides, face pale under the weight of the moment. Kay walked to her slowly, heart racing, voice soft. You don't have to do this alone. I'm here. We're all here. You're not a weapon. You're a choice. The child turned to her, eyes wide with something close to understanding, and for a split second the air cracked with light. A flash of energy rushed from her body like a heartbeat bursting outward, stopping the echoes in their tracks. They didn't fall. They didn't flee. They just froze as if time itself hesitated. And then a voice echoed, not out loud but inside every mind present. You remember? So do we. But memory is not the end. It wasn't the Watchers. It wasn't the echoes. It was something else. Something older. This is not invasion. This is alignment. The fractured must become whole. You split yourselves. We only followed. Kay stepped forward, fists clenched, breath shaking. You turned people into ghosts. No. You turned yourselves into fragments. You feared connection. You chose isolation. You forgot who you were. Jules growled. We didn't ask for any of this. But you answered. The echoes began to move again, slower now, almost cautious. One step toward Noor. She didn't move. The echo stopped in front of her, raised its hand and touched her forehead gently. Noor gasped, knees buckling. Kay rushed to her, catching her before she fell, and as Noor opened her eyes again, they were wet with tears. I saw it, she whispered. Everything. Before the fall. Before the Watchers. Before the break. Kay held her tighter. What break? The one we caused. Not them. We fractured time. Pushed technology past understanding. We cracked the path open and they came through, not to destroy, but to reconnect the threads. Their methods weren't mercy. But it wasn't war. The child's eyes burned with white light now, brighter than before. Kay turned to her. You can fix this. I'm not the fix, the child said quietly. I'm the mirror. I don't change what you are. I reflect what you choose. The echoes all turned now to face her. Kay felt it, that last beat. That moment before everything either collapses or becomes something else. She reached into her coat and pulled out the last device they'd recovered, the broken signal key from the sanctum. Still warm. Still pulsing. She handed it to the child. Then choose for us. The child took it in both hands. There was no explosion. No scream. Just a ripple, quiet, deep, like the sound of a soul exhaling. The echoes blinked and flickered like lights touched by static. Some vanished. Some remained but changed. Their eyes blinked, their posture shifted, like awareness had returned to them. Noor stood on her own, eyes wide. Jules backed away, watching as one of the echoes turned and walked straight into the tree line, disappearing like mist. The voice returned one last time. The worst kind are not those who destroy. They are those who forget. You remembered? The fracture holds. For now. Then silence. No signal. No hum. Just the wind. The sky cleared. The tension dropped from the air like it had never been there at all. Kay collapsed to her knees. Jules sat beside her. Nor stared at the stars. And the child. The child looked different. Older. Tired. But whole. She walked to Kay, knelt beside her, and placed the broken signal key in her hand. You were the answer. Not me. You always were. And then she stood up, took a breath, and walked into the forest alone. Kay tried to stand, but something stopped her. A feeling. Something unfinished. She looked at Jules. He saw it too. They turned to Noor. She was staring down at her own hands, glowing faintly. Kay froze. Noor. I didn't just see what they saw, she said quietly. They left something with me. And then, from deep within the forest, another light appeared. Not the child. Another one. Smaller. Flickering. A second child. Identical. Kay's blood ran cold. Jules stood slowly. I thought she was the only one. Noor shook her head. No. She was the first. Not the only. Kay felt her hands tremble again, her heartbeat spiking with a terrifying thought. The Watchers weren't trying to win. They were trying to seed. Failsafes. Across every crack. Every corner of the timeline. And the child had only been one of many. The connection wasn't closed. It had only just begun. Kay's mind spun, every instinct screaming. The second child standing at the edge of the forest wasn't just another creation. It was a sign. A warning. The echo that had once been a guide had now become the final puzzle piece. Kay could feel it in her bones. This wasn't a moment to celebrate victory. This wasn't the end of a battle. It was the beginning of something much bigger, something far more dangerous. Jules stood stiff, eyes narrowing as he stared at the second child, the faint glow pulsing like a heartbeat. We can't leave this thing out there. But Noor, her gaze still fixed on the child, didn't move. It's not what you think. It's not an enemy. It's another beginning. Kay clenched her fists, forcing herself to stand. I thought we were done. I thought we'd sealed the fracture. I thought this was over. Noor looked at her, the pain in her eyes undeniable. We did what we could. But we can't undo what's been done. The timeline is fractured. Those echoes, they were only a fraction of the damage. The child, the one who spoke to us, was the first to remember, the first to break free. But they weren't alone. And that second one, it's part of the restoration. Or the continuation. Whatever they choose to call it. Kay couldn't breathe. The child was gone, vanished into the forest, leaving behind nothing but a lingering pull, an unfinished chord in the music of the world. And now, another one had appeared, like a silent promise that the truth had never really been unlocked. The fracture isn't just time, Kay whispered, the pieces slowly clicking together in her mind. It's humanity. It's our memories. We broke everything by forgetting. Jules ran a hand through his hair, frustration clouding his face. This is insane. We can't just let this go. They'll keep coming. We don't even know who's controlling them. Or if anyone is, Noor added. The Watchers were never the real force. They were just a catalyst. The real issue is the echoes. The ones who look like us but aren't. They're not invaders. They're recreations. They've been sent to repair the timeline, but not to undo the fractures. To spread them. To rewrite who we are, piece by piece. Kay felt the chill spread through her veins. Her thoughts raced. Her memories of the sanctum, the child, the sudden power surge that had torn apart everything she thought she understood. The fractures weren't just cosmic. They were human. They were inside all of them. Inside her. Inside every broken part of history that they had long buried under lies, fear, and isolation. We need to find the first one, Kay said, turning toward the forest, every nerve on high alert. The child, the one who spoke to us. If we can find her. No, Noor interrupted. Her voice was gentle but firm. You can't. You don't understand. She's not the key to stopping this. She is the fracture. The words hit like a brick. Kay froze, her heart racing. What do you mean? She's the answer. She was the one who pushed the Watchers back. She. No, Kay, Noor said softly. She's a mirror. She was never supposed to fix anything. She was only supposed to show us what we became. The choices we made. She wasn't meant to fight them. She was meant to choose whether we kept fighting. She's a reflection of what's left of humanity. Kay felt a sick twist in her stomach. She wanted to scream. She wanted to run into that forest and grab the child, force her to change things to make them right. But Noor's words held her back. The realization hit harder than anything else. The child, that innocent being, was not some weapon. She wasn't a savior. She wasn't going to fix the damage they had done to the world. She was the one who had been left to witness it all, to remember. And now, like a mirror, the child would reflect whatever humanity chose. Jules finally spoke, voice trembling. What do we do now? What happens if the echoes spread like this? What happens to us? The tension in the air grew thicker. Kay's thoughts circled back to the forest, to the second child standing in the shadows, waiting for the world to decide what it would become. There was no answer coming from them. No promise of peace. Just the weight of their choices pressing down on everything. Kay breathed deep, shaking her head. We have to stop it before it spreads. Noor nodded slowly, her eyes dark with understanding. It's not just stopping it. We have to remember. We have to remember everything. Jules looked at Noor, then to Kay. How? Kay clenched her hands tighter. By facing it. By finding the truth. Not the truth they tried to bury. Not the truth the echoes are trying to rewrite. The real truth. The silence that followed was heavy. As if the world itself was holding its breath. Then Kay, for the first time, realized that she wasn't just facing an external threat. She was facing herself. She had been running from this fight, from these fractures inside of her, inside of everyone. And now she had no choice but to face it. To face them. She turned to Jules. We need to go back. To the sanctum. We need to go back to the source. Jules hesitated, fear flashing in his eyes. The sanctum's gone. We can't. We're not going there for the sanctum, Kay said, cutting him off. We're going there to confront what we are. What we've become. We're the ones who broke this world. The Watchers were only a symptom. The real problem is inside us. Inside all of us. The air was thick with the weight of her words, but something else flickered in her chest. A spark. A feeling she hadn't realized she'd been missing. She was afraid. Terrified. But she was also ready. Let's go, she said. They gathered what little they had left. Noor, as always, was the first to move. She was the one who had seen everything, but somehow she was still walking forward. The echoes were still out there, those fractured versions of humanity, waiting to pull apart the threads. And the child, Kay's mirror, was somewhere beyond them. Somewhere between them. Kay didn't know how to stop any of this, but she knew she had to try. They headed toward the forest, toward the unknown. Toward a truth that had yet to be revealed. And somewhere deep inside, Kay knew that they weren't just walking into the past. They were walking into the future. They moved through the forest, the towering trees casting long dark shadows that stretched like fingers reaching for them. The air was thick with the scent of pine and earth, but beneath it was something sharper. An edge of fear. A sense that something was watching, waiting. The child, the second one, had disappeared deep into the woods, leaving only the faintest trace. A ripple in the air, like the remnants of a dream fading upon waking. Kay's pulse quickened with every step, and with each breath, the weight of the situation pressed heavier on her chest. Jules stayed close behind, his steps hesitant. He'd always been the one who preferred action, the one who wanted to fix things by force, by will. But now, as they ventured deeper into the forest, it was clear that no amount of force would help them here. Not anymore. He glanced over at Kay, his eyes troubled. How are we supposed to find her in all this? She could be anywhere by now. Noor, who had been walking in silence beside them, finally spoke. We don't find her. She finds us. Kay turned her head to look at Noor, confusion clouding her mind. What do you mean? Noor didn't meet her gaze. Instead, she stared ahead, her voice low but steady. The child, she isn't hiding. She's waiting for us to understand. She's not the key to fixing this. She's the mirror. The answer lies in how we look at ourselves. If we're still running from the truth, we'll never find her. If we're still afraid of who we've become, we'll never be able to see what's in front of us. Kay clenched her fists, the words settling in her mind like stones. She knew Noor was right. They couldn't keep running from their own failures, from their mistakes. The echoes weren't the true threat. They were just the manifestation of their fear, their forgotten parts, their ignored flaws. But as they moved deeper into the forest, the feeling that they were being watched grew stronger. The silence around them was thick, almost suffocating. There was no sound of animals, no rustling of leaves in the wind. Just the steady beat of their footsteps and the occasional crack of a twig beneath their feet. Kay stopped suddenly, holding up a hand to signal the others. Do you hear that? Jules strained to listen, his brow furrowing in concentration. No. I don't hear anything. No, Noor said, her voice calm. But we should. And then it hit them. The air around them was wrong. It wasn't just still, it was stagnant. thick with a heaviness that weighed on their bodies and minds, like the atmosphere itself was pressing down on them. Kay could feel the shift, a strange pull in her chest. The trees seemed to close in, and the shadows around them grew darker, almost alive. It was as if the forest itself had become part of the fracture. Kay's breath quickened. This isn't just the forest. It's the timeline. It's shifting. Jules turned sharply, his face pale. The echoes. They're closing in on us. Nor nodded, her gaze distant. They've always been closer than we realized. But now, the fracture is starting to bleed into the physical world. The echoes, they're not just memories. They're living, breathing parts of us. Fragments of who we used to be. And they won't stop until they've rewritten everything. The ground beneath them trembled, just a faint vibration at first, but it was enough to send a chill down Kay's spine. What do? We wait, Noor said, her voice steady. And we listen. For a long moment, the world around them seemed to hold its breath. Time felt suspended, stretched thin like a thread ready to snap. The stillness was maddening. Kay glanced at Jules, who was scanning the trees nervously, and then at Noor, who stood almost motionless, her eyes closed as if she were listening to something only she could hear. And then, through the silence, a voice whispered. Soft at first, barely audible but growing louder, clearer. You remembered, but you haven't learned. Kay's heart stopped. The voice was familiar. It was the same voice she had heard before, the voice that had spoken through the child. But this time it was different. It was colder. More distant. A reflection of something broken. You were never meant to fix this. You were meant to choose. And you chose wrong. Kay felt a sharp pang of realization cut through her. It wasn't just a voice. It was a presence. The echoes weren't just copies of humanity. They were the collective guilt. The fear. The broken parts of everyone who had tried to turn away from the truth, from their own mistakes. The fracture wasn't just an event in time. It was the fracture of identity, the split between who they were and who they could have been. Jules's voice broke through the tension. What is this? What are you? The voice laughed, soft, hollow, and painful. We are you. We are what you forgot. What you left behind. The truth that you refused to see. Kay's breath caught in her throat as she felt the weight of the words. The echoes weren't enemies to be fought. They weren't invaders. They were us. They were what humanity had pushed aside in its pursuit of progress, of technology, of control. The things they had ignored in favor of building walls around their own fear. She swallowed hard, her mind racing. What do you want from us? You want peace. But peace comes at a price. Everything you've built has been a lie. You can't undo it. You can only choose how it ends. Kay's chest tightened. We can't just let this continue. We can't let everything be rewritten. You never had a choice. You were always part of this. Now you must decide, will you let the echoes take over? Will you erase the mistakes, or will you face them, learn from them, and rebuild? The forest seemed to breathe around them. The air thickened with the presence of something unseen but undeniably there. Kay's heart hammered in her chest. The choice before them wasn't just about defeating the echoes, it was about confronting the truth. About facing the choices they had made, the paths they had chosen, and acknowledging the damage they had done. And with that, Kay realized the final truth. They weren't here to stop the echoes. They were here to embrace them. To face the mistakes of the past and rebuild from the pieces. It was the only way forward. She took a deep breath, her voice steady as she turned to face her companions. We need to confront them. All of them. Not to fight, but to understand. Only then can we rebuild. Jules looked at her, uncertainty in his eyes, but also something else. Understanding. Noor nodded slowly, her face peaceful but determined. They weren't running anymore. They were facing it. Kay looked toward the second child, still standing in the distance, waiting for them to make the next move. Let's finish this. The forest shifted around them, the echoes closing in, not as enemies, but as fragments of something they had all forgotten. Together they stepped forward, ready to face the truth and reclaim the parts of themselves they had lost. As they approached the child, the air seemed to hum with the energy of 1,000 forgotten memories. And in that moment, Kay realized the battle wasn't over. It had just begun. They would fight not for victory but for redemption. For the chance to rebuild. To remember. To reconnect. And as the echoes gathered around them, Kay knew one thing for certain. The past would never truly be gone. But in their hands lay the power to shape the future.